everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Zeroed In, a podcast about IoT security, OT, and all this kind of fancy things. And I'm Olivier. I'm going to talk with Dan today, and he's going to do a lot of the talking. I'm going to do some of the questioning. We're going to talk about understanding your OT infrastructure and how best to secure it. Dan, how are you?
I'm doing very well today, Olivia.
Nice. Perfect. So my background is in it, and I encounter IoT in OT infrastructure a lot. And security very often comes as an afterthought, unfortunately. But the good news is that more and more people realize the importance of securing your OT infrastructure. And you have an experience as well in that domain. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and where you're coming from?
Sure. So my name's Dan Frechette. I am an OT security expert. I was formerly with a company called CyberX Labs, which eventually became the Defender for IoT product after Microsoft purchased us back in 2020. I have spent a good portion of my career working around OT environments and trying to secure them and heighten awareness about the importance of securing these environments.
Yeah. And there's one thing we're discussing, a lot while preparing, but also in general with our customers and so on. One important step, which is before you try and secure and monitor and whatnot, is to understand what you have as an OT infrastructure and network, and what your security posture is at time zero of your projects. So tell me a bit more about this aspect of securing an OT network, which is about understanding what you have, basically.
Sure. So the old adage goes, you can't secure what you don't know about. And unfortunately, a lot of OT environments are just that. A lot of them are quite old. A lot of the records were kept on a clipboard or maybe at best an Excel spreadsheet. And they can be very expansive. So think of a petrochemical facility. You have an OT environment that's taking care of, you know, temperature and pressure and volume and all that, and there could be tens of thousands of devices monitoring these rather complex systems, and keeping track of that is rather difficult. And of course changes happen over time, and not every all documentation gets updated. So OT operators are a lot of it is in their head, but it's not committed to paper. And the first thing you need to do to secure an environment is understand what you have. And that's not the easiest thing in the world to do, because the OT environments themselves are rather fragile. Um, Things like programmable logic controllers and remote terminal units, they don't have the horsepower, the processor in memory to be able to have an agent put on them. They are put in place to do a function. They read from the physical world, they send that information up into something that makes a decision and then acts upon that physical world.
Yeah.
Pressure's too high, reduce temperature, open a valve, that type of thing.
Yeah. Well, is
So,
it fair to say,
yes,
Dan,
sir.
that they were not designed for being connected to more than just the controller or the other equipments around them, right?
Right, exactly. So we'll get into this in a bit, I think. But yes, the way that these environments were historically secured was to air gap them, meaning they don't talk to anything else but their own OT environments. There was a walled garden type security process put in place where, um, if I control the perimeter and not let anybody in, I can be reasonably assured that the environment itself is secure.
Mhm.
But we're starting to see holes in that air gap environment now. And a lot of that's intentionally by wanting to pull data out of it,
Yeah.
or unintentionally.
Yeah, no, totally. We're starting to realize that there is interesting information that we can extract from this sea of data that these PLCs and other industrial equipment are producing that could allow not just to enhance the production process, and so on, but also eventually enhance your business, create new business lines, and so on. So that's definitely something that we're doing, which is connecting these OT networks to the world, right? The first step is to integrate with a local IT infrastructure. OT, as you were saying, is like more ancient equipment, more older equipment. When you put out a piece of equipment out there on a factory floor, it's there for the next 10, 20 years, right? And so technology that is
Oh,
out there might
absolutely.
not be as modern as what IT is used to. But now we're trying to connect these equipments to get the data that they are producing and eventually control them. So first step is connecting to an IT network. But we're talking about IT and OT without even explaining what really they are, assuming people know. But eventually, I would like for you to tell us what is the differences between an OT infrastructure and an IT. What is the difference between these two worlds?
Sure. So, IT, I think everybody's familiar with. That's what we're using right now. It's laptops, it's tablets, it's phones, it's routers, it's switches. It's moving high volumes of data across from one place to another for people to collaborate and share and, you know, work together. OT environments are often called operational technology or industrial control systems. Those are similar but not quite the same. It's still sharing information, but it's sharing information between machines. And I touched upon this earlier. It's reading a sensor in the physical world and making a decision on the readings that it gets to act upon that physical world. Now, in the IT world, it's all about data confidentiality and security. I don't want my information being leaked into the dark web, and then I'm starting to get a billion different emails from somebody trying to take something from me. In the OT world, the main thrust is um, availability of these systems, because the systems are up for a reason. They're either producing a product or they're delivering a service. So I'm making a widget or I'm giving you electricity or water or something like that. So, the more important aspect of the OT security is safety. And the reason I say that is human lives are at stake in OT environments. They are industrial in nature. They have high temperatures and high voltage and high pressure and all this other stuff that's going on. And if those are to be compromised, the people working in that facility are in danger.
Mhm.
Additionally, if it's producing something that's consumable by the public, if that was to be compromised, I can't guarantee the safety of the product that I'm producing. And a perfect example of that is Oldsmar, Florida, a number of years ago, where somebody was able to get into the water district and compromise the integrity of the water system. And that puts everybody at risk. And that's, the main thrust of OT security. Now,
Yeah.
in the IT world, we're running standard protocols and devices. It's like I said, it's laptops, it's email, it's web conferencing, database movement, voice over IP calls. It's all that stuff. Um, but in the OT world, you have specialized protocols that aren't recognized by most IT security products. So things like Modbus and BACnet and other things like that. The devices themselves are wildly different. Though it is a compute type device, it has a limited amount of memory and CPU that allows it to do what it does. It's build it for a purpose, and it doesn't allow for the installation of agents like you would on your laptop or your phone. So I have limited visibility into that. The devices themselves don't like to be asked what they're up to. If you interrupt these devices, you run the risk of shutting down the system, or at least hindering it completely. And another thing, OT environments have a number of old operating systems, and I will say this with a 100% honesty: every OT network I have done any work in is still running things like Windows XP. That hasn't
Yeah.
been updated since 2014, I believe.
But
So that
there's something down to that one is something interesting, which is, in especially in the operating world, is like don't change something that works, right? So until you have a reason to go and update your operating system in the IT world, we're always changing things, updating things, whatnot. There's one aspect which is features. In a system that is deployed on a factory floor, it has one purpose, one function. You don't need to update the features. The other thing
no,
is security, right? You want to update with latest security patches because you want to address the vulnerabilities of your existing systems. In the past, OT infrastructure, as you were saying, were air gapped and isolated. So they were not threatened. They were not under any menace. And you did not need to update the Windows XP or whatever OS running in there because it just works. And, why would you change something that works?
Exactly. So the people who stand up these OT systems, they know them incredibly well, and they know, what each function is and what they do and what have you. And it's like they set this up, and it's like, okay, it's perfect. Don't touch it. Don't ever touch it because it's running exactly how we want. And any changes to that, even updating the firmware on the device, could bring in unknown um, behaviors into the network. So a lot of times it's like you set it and you forget it and you
Yep,
just do break fix. And in fact, to
exactly.
the point where with like a PLC, it will be we have the exact same one on a shelf, and if that one breaks, I'm going to slide this one in and we're back up and running.
Yeah, and
So
because
yeah,
it's you have determinism in that, right? It's been working for the
right,
last 10 years. It's going to work for the next 10 years. There's no reason for the same function apart from a physical failure or electronic failure, right?
precisely.
Yeah, but things have
Yes,
changed. Things have changed because we are connecting these OT networks for the reason we explained before. So IT and OT, different worlds, they need to be connected. IT has a different perspective on security, as you explained, than OT. But OT needs to, I wouldn't say upgrade. They have to take into account a new paradigm. They need to implement over-the-air updates. They need to do things that didn't need to do before. They need to have a better understanding of what's going on. I like the way you're telling anecdotes, real world anecdotes and stories. Can you tell us about an actual real threat? You talked about this water utility being compromised as being a big threat. Everyone understands that. Have there been like very notable known not threats but actual actions by bad people on infrastructure that were like very critical? Can you tell us some stories there?
sure, absolutely. So, one of the most famous ones was the thing called the Triton attack. It was an attack by an unknown entity or nameless entity in a Saudi Arabian petroleum facility. The bad actors were able to get login credentials through social media campaigns or phishing or what have you, and they were able to log in. And then once they logged in to the IT system, they were able to do a lateral movement into the OT system. And then when in the OT system, they were able. And here's one thing about OT networks: they all the protocols communicate in clear text. There's no encryption going on.
Yeah,
So if you get in there and see the packets, I
yeah,
can
there's
tell
no
who's
processing
talking to.
power to encrypt. You were saying that, right? There are
Right,
limited
exactly.
capabilities, so you can't.
Right. You can't even interrupt them, they'll fall over. Never mind trying to get them to encrypt. And
Yeah.
that leads to so they were able to get in there, install a rat or remote Trojan in a PLC on their safety system. So you can imagine a petroleum facility, they're working with a lot of noxious chemicals, that's what they do. Now, the safety part of that is incredibly important because when you have volatile chemicals like that in an environment and you shut down the safety system, if they were to go in a runaway state where you don't have any checks and balances on them, you could blow up the facility. And so that goes back to the safety I mentioned earlier. It
Mhm.
puts the safety of the people in that area at risk. And it also puts, that entire environment that particular facility is at risk. They don't, these facilities are expansive. They can be huge. And if you were to compromise that, then you end up flooding the area with, volatile chemicals, which nobody wants.
Mhm. Yeah, and so you can imagine that with such a threat, the ability to ransom a company is there, right? So you could threaten to blow that facility, and well, yeah, people lives are at stake, but then there is a huge amount of money at stake in there, right?
Absolutely. Every second that one of these systems is not up and running, it's not producing a product
Yeah.
or a service. So it costs money just by by shutting it down or the threat of shutting it down. And then it costs money to bring it back online
Yep.
if it was shut. These systems aren't like rebooting your laptop. This is, an orchestrated turn up procedure or turn down procedure. You don't yank the plug on this because you're in an unknown state, and that causes big problems in OT
Yeah.
environments.
Cool. So, well, not cool. Like scary, but how can we prevent that? How can one go first about scanning and understanding their OT infrastructure, what they have in place, what are the equipment that are on the network, what kind of protocols they're talking, and so on. What exists in terms of tools today?
So the one I'm most familiar with is the Defender for IoT product, but there's other ones out there. But um, the way it works is you bring a sensor, you either virtualize it or you put a physical sensor in the OT environment, and then you steer traffic to the ports on it. So I mentioned earlier in OT networks, there's no encryption. Um, and you can just take the packets and you send it to something that understands the OT protocols. And as those packets are introduced to the sensor, it's cracking the packets open, determining who's talking to who and when they talk, and what protocols they use to communicate. And the other part about it is a lot of these devices will advertise what their configuration is. So not only do you get a list of IP addresses, then you get the MAC addresses, and then you get the vendors, and then you get the make and model, and then the firmware. And when you can get that level of detail just by listening to packets, you can make huge leaps towards understanding what's in the environment. If it shows up on the sensor, that means there's a packet being produced by that. So there's something alive on the network. We can understand what's alive and make that correlation between that device, its security posture, and how it interacts with all the other devices in that network. And this is done completely passively. I'm not interrogating devices. I've already said you can't do that. I am just simply listening to what is freely available by sending packets into a sensor. And then, like I said, once you get that list of all the devices, you can start looking at the security posture of each and every device that's discovered, because we know, say, the DNA of the device, make, model, firmware, et cetera, et cetera. Hardware revisions, it all depends on the device and the protocols, but that's all readily available. And that's an exciting part of this. It's also the scary part of this, because anybody else who can get, those packets can do the exact same thing if they know how to parse an OT protocol. And there's the rub. It's easy to secure them once you listen to what's going on, but it's also easy to compromise them because they can listen to what's going on too, and then take that knowledge and use it as leverage against the system.
Yep, yeah. So scanning and understanding, what's there, what's out there is great. And you expressed, you named it. It's a sensor you install. It senses what's going on the network. Is can it be used for ongoing monitoring as well? Because maybe if you have someone who hijacked your network, but like whatever way, there's going to be some traffic on that network that is not normal, right? Are there ways that you can detect that there is someone on the network doing things they're not supposed to?
Yeah, a great question. So, I what I just described would be like an audit. I go in there and I look at it, and I give you a bunch of reports that tell you your security posture. That data is valid until the sensor is taken off the network. You're no longer having visibility. So you can say, well, at this point in time, we were secure. But now that we're not on it, I can't guarantee that because things change. There's a constant attack on these OT networks. So much so that the NSA came out with an advisory saying, you know what, we know these are critical in nature and they're not well defended. So do something about it. So to answer your question, because I have a tendency to ramble, yes, a sensor can be left in place and it can learn the network itself. And what I mean learn, OT networks are very deterministic in nature. They do the same thing all the time. I think of it as a pocket watch. Each gear has a function and it meshes with the other thing, and it just works. And the sensor can learn that with a great deal of accuracy. So I know that I talk to you and you talk to him and he talks to her, and that's all that's ever done. Well, all of a sudden, I'm talking directly to this third party. Well, that's anomalistic behavior. That's behavior that we've never seen before, and we can alert to that. So, in the Defender for IoT world, there's 5 machine learning engines that look for things like malware, of course, and then operational anomalies, like these two devices aren't communicating properly. But
Mm.
the big ones are, do I see behavior I've never seen before? Did I see a new IP address? Did I see a new MAC address? Did I see a new communication parameter that I've never seen before? And we can alert to that and say, hey, you know what? I now see that this device that's supposed to be air gap was seen communicating with an external IP address. Well, that's a big problem. That
Mhm.
proves your air gap's not intact. And that could also be either a indicator of compromise or a potential compromise, because somebody can communicate with something on the inside of your network.
Yep. So just in that, I would say there's already a lot of value, like detecting what you have, understanding your OT infrastructure, the set of assets that are connected. Now you're also able to understand what they are, what what they're running, and now you understand as well who they're communicating with and what they're doing. So is it fair to say that day one you deploy such a sensor, you already are collecting very insightful information that gets you one step closer to have a more secure OT infrastructure, right?
Absolutely. Packets don't lie. They read the packets, they read them well, and the sensor, once deployed and fed packets from the proper place in the network, will start instantly building this database of everything it sees, including the devices in their role and the intricacies or the individual components of a PLC. So a PLC could have a backplane, racks, and we'll tell you each one of those. So yes, almost instant value from putting a sensor on.
And
Um,
and how hard is it to do? I mean, at Think Zero, we talked to customers who are interested in using Defender for IoT as their step zero to securing their OT infrastructure. How hard is that? Can you describe what would be the steps to take in order to get to that result?
sure, I've done it a couple of times in my life, so it's quite
Okay, just a couple.
just a couple. So it's actually quite simple. Uh, the best way to do it is have a conversation between Think Zero and your OT team and your security team. All we need is packets. That's all we need to be able to do this. These sensors actually can run standalone. They don't have to connect to the cloud. A sensor can be completely air gapped in its own. But what we have to do is look at the network that is running your OT environment and determine the optimal place to gather the packets. And that's typically around layer one of the Purdue model. We want to be able to see the east-west traffic and the north-south traffic. That
Mhm.
will give us great value, because at that level you're able to see the devices and how they communicate and the protocols used and the MAC address and the firmware and everything else. So setting up a sensor in a virtual environment, so say you don't have a physical one but you have a virtualized environment, it takes about 20 minutes to build a sensor. Literally, you follow the instructions, you fire up the sensor, you steer packets to it, and you start watching it accumulate. And you can see it on the dashboard, number of discovered devices. Then it'll start breaking that down by, okay, well, these are all the devices that are running on this subnet, or these are all the devices that are running on this VLAN, or these are all the devices that are running this particular protocol. And it builds out a beautiful map for you and based on the Purdue model. You got the physical layer down, the supervisory in the middle, and then the enterprise one above. Now, ideally, that enterprise shouldn't be talking down to lower parts, but we help uncover that stuff. Say
Mhm.
you have a misconfigured device that somehow has been talking to something low in the OT and low in the Purdue model. We'll be able to point that out to you, that this is communicating with a PLC using this protocol, and this is how often it's doing it. So typically within 10 minutes of getting its first packet, you're starting to get insight into what's going on. Literally,
Wow.
it's that fast.
How much of that is working locally versus working in the cloud? Do I have to connect my OT infrastructure day one to a cloud service for extracting the value out of Defender for IoT?
No. So the way the sensor can function in a hybrid mode, or so it can run completely air gapped, like I mentioned before. I can build one on my laptop and bring it in. I will use the web to license it because that's how Microsoft license it. You use your Azure subscription to go in and license it. That just turns the sensor on, but it doesn't have to be connected to the internet to function. The other way is a hybrid where people would use it locally at, say, your facility. Say I'm a multinational corporation and you're responsible for the San Diego plant. You would have local access. You can see everything that you need to see in real time and be able to go in and react and see what's going on. But maybe the security headquarters team is responsible for 50 such locations. Then you would use it in a hybrid mode. You see your stuff, but you don't see anybody else's stuff. Same with them. And then the SOC would be able to see what's going on in each individual location.
Okay, so you can go from like fully isolated, air gapped, local scanning, monitoring to fully integrated into my SIEM, into my SOC, and into my security infrastructure as a company, right? You can go all the way from one to the other.
Right. You can do the crawl, walk, run thing. Crawl, get local visibility into what's going on. Your network you're concerned about your OT network. That's fine because that's one of your metrics is to keep this thing up and running.
Yeah, yeah.
But now you're being told by insurance companies and everything else that you have to start securing this environment. You don't know where to start. Well, the first thing to do is figure out what you got. And that's rather simple. We steer packets to it, whether it's through a span port or a tap or a packet broker. Take the packets from the OT environment, send it to the sensor, get that inventory, get a list of all of the security insights that we can provide to you, CVEs and attack surface and what have you. And then once you've got there, I want to connect it up into my SIM. So the security team gets visibility into stuff that they've almost never had in the past. The IT and the OT world has almost always been two different worlds. They're very, very siloed. OT engineers, they keep the system up and running. They make sure that it's producing whatever it's producing, and the people are safe. The IT, as you said, they're responsible for the IT world, but they're also the security people. And sometimes you get the security people and the OT people butt heads. Security, I need insight, and the OT people like, I can't give you insight because I'm going to risk compromising my environment. If you
Yep.
do so passively, those silos start to fall apart. It's like, oh, the OT, and then they really do need to have some say in what's going on. But and the IT people can say to the OT people, well, I can give you a lot of information and I won't touch your network. I will not interact with anything. I will just be, a fly on the wall, listening to what's going on, and then giving you these wonderful reports about what we see in your environment. And again, are there any vulnerabilities? But also, is it running efficiently? And that's one thing a lot of people don't talk about. One of the benefits of being able to watch the network is to make sure that these devices are communicating efficiently and they're doing the job the correct way. That brings it back to one of the first things about OT networks. It's availability of the system, but it's also the efficiency of the system.
Yeah, so security doesn't have to be the cleavage, the thing that creates the silo, the separation. Security could actually be what ties together the IT and the OT world.
Precisely, we can get these groups that have historically tolerated each other to be working off the same sheet of music.
Yeah, how the how do we say how the tide changes or whatever, right? Because or turning the table, the expression I was looking for, right? We're turning the table here on the
Oh,
narrative that
absolutely.
security is the problem. Security actually could be the solution for breaking the silos in terms of data, in terms of world between OT and IT.
Exactly.
Awesome. Dan, The lessons learned today in that zeroed in podcast are: know your OT network, understand what assets you have, who's talking to who on your OT network. That's doable, that's feasible. Tools like Defender for IoT will help you do that. And it's not hard, it's passive. And then you can extend that solution to your IT infrastructure, getting insights into what's going into OT, enhance productivity, enhance security, and so forth, and break the silos between OT and IT. Did I summarize all of that correctly?
Absolutely, and that's a drum I've been beating for years. These are incredibly important environments. We have to do something about it, and it's not as difficult as most people think it is. It's
Awesome.
actually quite approachable.
It is. It is. And we can help Thing Zero. We can help you with that.
Great.
So give us a call, reach out, and Dan will be here to help you secure your OT network. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.